Queer people have been featured in Hollywood movies since the beginning, but their representation has evolved over the decades as the standards and norms of society have changed, which makes it somewhat of a guessing game to figure out what characters are and aren't gay if it is not explicitly said due to what was acceptable at the time. This can be drawn back to 1934 with the establishment of the Hays Code. The code was a set of rules placed on American filmmakers in Hollywood that significantly restricted what was allowed to be shown in movies. One of the prohibited subjects was sexual perversion, which included any depiction of homosexuality. This led filmmakers to utilize subtext to imply queer characters and themes, also known as queer coding. As a result, this period saw no authentic queer representation, as everything was fabricated to fit the rigorous policies. Characters that were to be read as part of the LGBTQ+ community were often villains, monsters, or predators to a heteronormative society around them. Bury your gays was popular. The queer code character would be punished by death or endure great amounts of suffering because of their identity. Also entering the scene was queerbaiting, where characters of the same sex flirted for laughs but never took it further. These harmful depictions became the set tropes and stereotypes to use as queer representation for decades to come. The documentary Disclosure discusses how the decades-long negative representation of the transgender community has taught people to fear trans people through the portrayal of them as deviants and perverts. I reviewed 3 movies that illustrate their transgender characters in this way. I will be using he/him pronouns for the characters as they are referred to that way in the movie. Also, I will be using the terms transvestite, transsexual, and transgender accordingly with each character. Starting with Alfred Hitchcock's 1960 Psycho. City clerk Marion Crane stops for a night at a roadside motel ran by Norman Bates, a shy man who takes care of his housebound mother. Marion is killed by her the same night, prompting a search by her sister, boyfriend, and a private investigator who is also killed. Norman goes to great lengths to protect his mother and preserve the motel. However, it is later revealed that Norman's mother has been deceased for years, and Norman has taken on a murderous persona of hers. He is arrested for the 2 murders and is declared insane. Despite Norman being central to the story's conflict, he is not introduced until later in the movie. In the first half of the film, Marion is the main character that the audience follows, as she steals money from her boss and flees the city. We meet Norman when Marion meets him, as she checks into a motel. He becomes the main character after her death, and then the surprise killer. Psycho is a mystery thriller, and overall a slasher horror film. The genres of mystery and thriller make Norman into a suspicious and deceiving character through his actions of covering up the murders while presenting himself as meek, while the genre of horror makes Norman to be an insane murderer who cross-dresses to be his mother when he kills. Reminder, this was 1960 when the Hays Code was still being enforced. Psycho was pushing the boundaries of what was expected. In 1968, the code was dropped, being considered outdated. And in 1975, Jim Sharman's cult classic, The Rocky Horror Picture Show, was released. Cookie-cutter couple Brad and Janet are planning to marry and leave their town of Denton on a stormy night, only to get lost and stumble upon a grand castle. They encounter crazy house guests, eccentric housekeepers, and the host at the center of it all, Frankenfurter, a mad scientist who is throwing a party to celebrate his achievement of creating a perfect man. The night turns into a nightmare for Brad and Janet as they are thrown into a world of promiscuity and aliens. Yes, as it turns out, Frank and his housekeepers are aliens from the planet transsexual Transylvania, and when Frank loses control of his creation, his alien companions turn on him and kill him. Brad and Janet are the heterosexual couple that we follow the entire story, but once Frankenfurter enters the storyline, he takes control as the main character, as we see him carry out his evil alternative agenda. Rocky Horror is a musical comedy, but overall a horror movie. The genre of musical comedy makes Frank to be a flamboyant caricature of a transvestite, reading as something out of a comic book than reality. His outlandish look and dramatic voice comedically clash against Brad and Janet's plainness, and the genre of horror makes Frank to be an off-the-rails evil scientist who entraps Brad and Janet for his own gain. In the mid-70s, the camp aesthetic was central to queer storytelling in taking them out of the closet and giving them a spotlight. The spotlight was turned to interrogation light on how the queer community lives in private, with Jonathan Demm's 1991 The Silence of the Lambs. FBI student Clarice Starling is put on a case linked with the serial killer Buffalo Bill, who believes he is a transsexual and is skinning woman to create his own woman suit. Through interviews with the heavily imprisoned Dr. Hannibal Lecter, or Hannibal the Cannibal, Clarice slowly gains information about Bill and is able to track him down and kill him before skinning his next victim. Clarice is the main character and heroine who is supported by a side character and known villain Hannibal. Buffalo Bill, or real name James Gum, is a secondary villain in Hannibal Lecter and is at the center of Clarice's case. He is shown in sporadic scenes torturing and kidnapping his latest victim. His scenes are minimal until Clarice is on his trail, and then his scenes become longer in showing how he behaves in private. The movie is a mix of horror and crime, James being at the crux of both. He is a hidden serial killer doing the gruesome act of skinning women to wear their skin. The commonality between these three films is that they are all considered to be horror movies, and that there is a character who is transgender or meant to be read as transgender. Even though it would seem progressive to have a character part of the LGBTQ+ community on the big screen, Norman Bates, Frankenfurter, and Buffalo Bill all play into awful stereotypes that are fueled by the horror genre. The first trope that is blatantly obvious among the three is the notion that trans people are monsters. The horror genre is perfect for the queer character to get the role of the monster that people are to fear. In Psycho, it is made certain who the psycho is. Norman initially appears to be the boy next door type when he checks Marion into the motel, but that facade falters when we see him peeping through a hole in Marion's room, watching her get undressed. Later, when he finds her dead body, he cleans up the murder scene and does a thorough job of disposing her car, and her belongings. When the truth is revealed that Norman committed the murders, it is alarming that he was able to do all of this without feeling a twinge of guilt or hesitation. At the end of the movie, when Norman is caught for his murders, the question of why he was dressed like that is asked, and it is immediately assumed that Norman is a transvestite. It is made clear by a psychiatrist that he is not exactly one, as he was just trying to keep the illusion of his mother being alive by dressing and acting like her. However, there is that immediate implication that because of Norman's mental disturbance leading him to kill, he is trans. In other words, that there is a correlation of being mentally ill and identifying as trans. For being the Hays Code era, Psycho is straight to the point. When looking at Rocky Horror, though, it is amazing to see that so much more of the queer community can be shown when given the opportunity. On the contrary, the same trope of monstrous trans people is used. Frank introduces himself through his song Sweet Transvestite, scaring Janet to faint by his appearance alone. A few scenes later, an old captive of his, Eddie, gets loose and Frank kills him without remorse and later commits cannibalism. Throughout the movie, Frank is verbally and physically abusive to his housekeeper companions and his creation. He is also extremely manipulative. He splits Brad and Janet up to sleep with both, causing a rift between the couple, leading to more unmarital sex. Frank is a literal alien sex fiend, proudly brandishing a transvestite identity, scaring and corrupting purity as represented by Brad and Janet. Trans identity is once again illustrated as being connected to malicious actions, coming off as being dependent of another. In the years ahead, true horror would be utilized to tell a darker story of trans individuals in The Silence of the Lambs. Buffalo Bill, or James as I'll refer to him, is the epitome of falsehoods regarding trans women. Through short scenes scattered in the movie, we see him lure his latest victim under false pretenses and hold her hostage in a well within his home to prepare her for skinning. While she begs for her life, James is busy at work on his woman's suit and himself. He puts on makeup, wears colorful, revealing clothing, and even tucks his genitals between his legs to present as female. He does all of this in the confines of his home, in his basement. James is painted as perverted and predatory. Trans women are then looked at through the same lens. The idea that trans women are men in dresses is best depicted here, even though the movie confirms James is not transsexual. With that being said, he is kidnapping unsuspecting cisgender women to literally wear his skin in order to fulfill his desire of transforming his identity. Once again, this made obsession that trans people have with committing atrocities is reinforced. According to an article from 14 East, Blood, Bodies, and Binaries, Trans Women in Horror by Jenny Holtz, horror movies provide a vehicle for viewers to project their own struggles with fear, loss, and death, and to be able to engage with those feelings in a contained manner that is socially acceptable. By making trans women objects of fear, films like these reinforce harmful ideas about trans identity. Fictional serial killers who identify as something outside the norms of gender conformity become a target and reasoning to why transgender individuals in real life are not human, but monsters. Norman, Frank, and James all present themselves in a feminine appearance in their movies while participating in murder. To the other characters trying to survive their murderous tendencies, they are the lurking psychopathic creatures that need to be warded off or killed. Speaking of being killed, the other trope found in all three movies is that of bury your gays, where the queer character is met with death as punishment for their identity. though that is not always the case. The queer characters can survive the entirety of the movie, but be put through great amounts of suffering and struggle. An example of the latter is in Psycho. Norman lives through the whole duration of the movie, but has suffered his whole life oppressed by his close, toxic relationship with his mother. In the movie, he is alienated from society and reality, and he creates his own reality through keeping his mother alive. This prevents him from indulging in something like dating, as his mother comes out of him in a possessive rage to keep Norman to herself. It is confusing, but it is all about the struggle for one's identity. Norman's punishment is not death, but being taken control over by his mother after her death. She takes over his mind and body, leaving him as his mother and not himself. Rocky Horror, on the other hand, incorporates both suffering and death for its main queer character. Before Frank meets his death, he sings two songs that best describe his suffering behind the glitz and glamour of being a mad alien scientist. The first one, Don't Dream It, Be It, is about being true to your identity. The second one, I'm Going Home, Frank sings after his alien companions tell him his lifestyle is too extreme and they are all to leave Earth back to their home planet. He sings this song as his one last hurrah for his time on Earth and is immediately killed when finished. Both songs reveal a side of Frank that the audience is not familiar with, but nonetheless introduce us to a more human side of him. This ending is a lot more theatrical than the other two movies, as the music is the emotional punch for an otherwise unsympathetic character. The Silence of the Lambs is like Rocky Horror in the sense that the queer character experiences suffering and is ultimately met with death, but in not such a grandiose way. Hannibal states to Clarice that James is not transsexual, but merely wants to change his identity because of the systematic abuse he has endured throughout his life. He hates his identity so much to the point that he needs to change it, therefore believing that makes him a transsexual. Hannibal speculates that James sought sex reassignment surgery, but was turned down because of his past abuse. We see James coping with this through his predatory murder of women, and his punishment for the killings is his own by Clarice as she defends herself from him. According to a YouTube video by The Take, the barrier gaze trope explained, violent depictions of queer characters underscores the feeling that LGBTQ people will inevitably be rejected and abused. These stories reinforce the idea that to be queer is to live under a cloud of violence and misery, where safety and happiness is under constant threat. Norman wanted to live in his own world where his mother was alive, even if it meant he himself could not be happy. Frankenfurter wanted to live life on Earth with his creation, but was stamped out by his companions, despite his best efforts to try and keep his dream alive. James wanted to live as someone who wasn't broken by any means necessary. Being queer or transgender is painted as being difficult and damaging, and in this case, a real horror show. Besides these specific queer tropes in the films, there are also notable patterns of misrepresentation. These patterns can take various forms and can shape viewers' perceptions in misleading or stereotypical ways. A pattern that can be seen through all the movies is that of gender-based roles. In Psycho, Marion is a typical damsel in distress who cannot save herself. Her sister almost succumbs to the same fate of being defenseless, but Marion's boyfriend appears just in time to stop Norman from killing her. Norman is actually in contrast to Marion's boyfriend when it comes to masculinity. Norman is sensitive, almost cowardly when he is himself, only turning violent when he's his mother. This flipping of roles can be read as trans women being violent. In Rocky Horror, Brad and Janet are the perfect example of what a heterosexual couple should be. Janet is a virgin hometown girl who finds comfort in conformity and familiarity, while Brad is a defender of them, reassuring Janet everything is okay and she needs to calm down. He possesses anger and frustration, unlike Janet. However, as the movie progresses, the roles of the two flips. Janet gains a sense of autonomy, taking control of her sexuality, even saying her confidence has increased, while Brad becomes scared of the world around him, wanting to go back to what he knows. Other female characters, Magenta and Columbia, are in control of their identity through the whole movie, not being afraid to stand up to Frank. And other male characters, Eddie and Rocky, are hyper-masculine in their looks and behavior, while Frank is over-the-top feminine all around. And the fact that Frank controls these two hyper-masculine characters means that his appearance does not limit his ability to act in a dominating way. In The Silence of the Lambs, it is made clear that Clarice is in a male-dominated field as she is surrounded by male agents and officers. While working on the case, a man does make advances towards her, but she shuts him down fast. In talking to Hannibal, he plays mind games with her, bringing up her appeal, and Clarice only breaks down once from their first meeting, but does not get discouraged. She was put on the case because she is top of her class, and her persistence shows that she does not stop even when told to by her male boss. Buffalo Bill, on the other hand, takes on an excessively female appearance to better align with his transformation into a woman. By wanting to solidify his female form with an over-the-top look, Buffalo Bill is in a way mocking what it means to be a woman. According to an article from the Pentucket Profile, The Evolution of Gender Roles in Horror Films by Abby Kaufman, the horror movies that have been produced over the century have depicted women as weak and men as overpowering in most of the films. However, as the horror movie industry has become more developed and complex, gender roles have reversed in multiple movies. Both statements are true, as each film contains the weak woman and overpowering man, and vice versa. The horror genre is all about fear, and the fear of switching gender roles is most utilized. Norman, a soft-mannered boy turning into a crazed woman, an effeminate Frank having control over the hyper-masculine men, and female FBI trainee Clarice going over male authorities' heads to get the job done. All very terrifying to a patriarchal society. Another pattern that is present in the films is the need for coupling and or a relationship. At the beginning of Psycho, Marion is in an established relationship with her boyfriend who later goes searching for her, and Norman becomes infatuated with Marion but does not act on it because of his mother. This can make Norman code as gay as he does not actively pursue Marion. In Rocky Horror Brand, Janet's desire to marry is the catalyst of the story. As for Frank, his number one goal is to create the perfect man for himself. His alien companions, Magenta and Riff Raff, are in a relationship with each other from their interactions on screen, even though it is later revealed that they are siblings. Eddie and Columbia have been in a relationship for a while, as inferred with Eddie's introduction and Columbia's despair that follows his death. In returning to Brad and Janet, they both separately sleep with Frank through coercion, and later Janet even makes it with Rocky. In contrast, The Silence of the Lambs has no relationships between the characters. Clarice is not romantically interested in any character, but there is tension between her and Hannibal as they form a bond. There's also a brief mention of James having a former lover, but is not given a partner during the plot. According to a YouTube video by The Take, Queer Coding Explained, Hidden in Plain Sight, the act of queer-baiting characters is quote, implying queer characters or hinting at a future queer romance in an attempt to secure a queer audience without ever delivering anything explicit enough to alienate a homophobic audience. In Psycho and The Silence of the Lambs, relationships are not at the top of the plot. As for Rocky Horror, it does not fall victim to queer-baiting its queer characters with other characters. The movie shows Frank seducing Brad and Janet along with his sexual desires for his creation. In a scene towards the end, there's even a make-out session between the male and female characters. Coupling is replaced with pure lust. It should be known that the queer characters in movies are usually not played by queer actors. There are some exceptions in the 3 films, though. Norman Bates is played by Anthony Perkins, who would later be out as a gay man. And as for the other roles, Janet, played by Susan Sarandon, has said she is bisexual, and Jodie Foster, who played Clarice, is a lesbian. According to an article from Days, Do Queer Roles Really Need to be Played by Queer Actors? By James Gregg, the question of whether straight actors should play gay roles is a long-time running debate which tends to center around the politics of representation. Some argue that it's an insult to marginalized people who deserve to see themselves portrayed authentically on screen. Others say that if we are too prescriptive, we risk outing actors who are either closeted or private about their sexuality. This makes it seem that queer people are incapable of either telling their stories or getting people to listen to them. And if they do wish to tell their story, it could lead to the disaster of invasiveness because society is obsessed with what is different or is considered perverted. Queer representation has improved with the casting of LGBTQ+ actors into various roles, queer directors' voices being uplifted in the film industry, and queerness crossing genres and topics to represent the community in a greater lens. With that being said, I think there are still a few things that need to be addressed in these films. One, that transgender individuals are not all white and skinny. Most of the time, trans people are marketed to only one demographic, leaving others feeling that there is something so wrong with them that they do not deserve recognition. People of color and of different body sizes should be seen. Something else that needs to be addressed is the idea of only lesbians, gays, and bisexuals existing when there are so many other sexual orientations that should be shown love. There are plenty of other identities that have yet to be seen or talked about that further push them into the closet. One last suggestion is that queer people do not all like the same things. We do not all love musical theater, fashion, or RuPaul's Drag Race. There are a million other things that queer people find comfort or enjoyment in that make us who we are, not a caricature of what society thinks we are.